Okay, this is my lesson number 4. It's on socialization and social interaction. So in this lesson, we're going to cover the definitions of socialization, social reproduction. We'll cover who the four main socializing agents are and what roles they play. Then we'll get into, we'll discuss 4 specific types of socialization. It's not the only ones, but it's 4 that have been, I guess, highlighted. Gender socialization, socialization of race, ethnicity, and nationality. And then we'll develop a very important concept. It's core to this. It's really core to a lot of things. It's the concept of the self. What is the self? And then we'll go into Mead's discussion of the development of self-identity, going through 3 stages at different ages, starting from 0 to 5, then 5 to 9, and then above 9. All right. We'll cover some other concepts like looking glass self. This is very important. And we'll talk about social identity. Then we'll get into some of the theories on social interaction. That we'll actually cover just one. We'll cover the theory by Ervin Goffman. This guy right here. It's called Dramaturgical Theory, and that'll be it for today. Following lectures, we'll cover exchange theory, social influence experiments, network theory, and then social reality and the dominant mass perception, how social reality forms and controls the dominant mass perception. Okay, so socialization. All right. It is a process by which a helpless infant becomes a self-aware, knowledgeable person, skilled in the ways of culture, including, all the elements of culture. The main elements are language, the materials that we use, norms and values we have, beliefs, traditions, behavior, religion, work, leisure. Okay, so it's a process by which a newborn helpless infant who doesn't know anything is transformed into a person who understands the culture, who has skills, who can contribute to society, who is, in this case, a capable and confident woman. All right. All right. So now the next term I want to teach you is social reproduction. It doesn't have to do with physical reproduction. It's really the passing down of culture. All right. So it's replicating culture within each generation to generation. And through this process, it creates somewhat of a permanence or social structure. Right? Culture itself can be considered a social structure. And that permanence, of course, is not perfect. I mean, there's change from culture to culture. People do things different ways, generation to generation. But a lot of things are consistent and are passed down, from generation to generation, as shown by this grandfather teaching his kid something. All right. So the 4 main agents of socialization are family, school, and peers and media. I put them in that order because roughly, that's the order of exposure, although media can occur early on. Anyways. So start with family. All right. Now, family is a very important socializing agent. It's the first one kids are exposed to when they're first born, and is due to limited outside exposure. All right. The importance of family in socialization is huge, and I believe to a great extent it establishes the course of a person's life and largely determines their success or failure. Right? Now, there's all sorts of other factors involved, that's for sure. But the family and how the family directs and guides and rears and gives motivation to an individual is very important. So, family socialization involves things like child rearing, disciplining kids, teaching them religion, morals, concept of right and wrong, teaching values. This is very important. The importance of education and hard work and sacrifice. The importance of delayed gratification, right? That you got to sacrifice early on and do hard work, for example. It teaches respect for others, teamwork, leadership. It should teach honesty as part of morals, right and wrong. teach social skills, teaches the various forms of identity. And we'll talk about these later down here in a little bit greater detail. Gender identity, racial, ethnic, national identity. Now, when you get to racial, ethnic, and national, these often involve what's called pride development. Right? That when you teach these, you teach them in a manner that nurtures a sense of pride, kind of, strokes your ego a little bit, which I believe is not a very good thing. It's a very bad thing, but that's dumb. Now, there is no standard pattern of family socialization. Family socialization can vary from family to family, of course, from culture to culture, from period to period, time to time. It can change. As exposure to other sources of information increases, like school, peers and media, as they increase, that can diminish the family influence. All right, so next one is schools. So school socialization, the purpose of it is to teach us to become functional and productive members of society. It teaches us skills, right? And those skills are both like professional skills involving, being functional, working in society, but also social skills, right? It's equally important. Schools instill moral consensus by teaching national histories, national symbols, national identity, Pledge of Allegiance, and beliefs. Recall that moral consensus is part of functionalism, and it's the idea that when you have a consensus, everyone agrees to certain things you hold true about your nation and your society, right? And being moral. Well, they're positive things, right? You see a positive. So you teach positive things about your history, national symbols, national identity, Pledge of Allegiance, all that stuff, and beliefs about our country. And that leads to pride development, no less than the racial, ethnic, and national identities. Well, this is national identity largely. So it's pride development. Now, I put here functionalism versus conflict because, as we learned in lesson number 1, there was disagreement as to the impact of moral consensus. According to the functionalists, they say, oh, this is a good thing because it's functional, because it creates unity and cohesion within a society, right? Decreases conflict, right? But the conflict theorists, on the other hand, say, hold on, wait a minute. That may be true, but it also makes the people more susceptible, more easily manipulated by whoever's in charge and leadership, and people can be led to, whatever national policy, right? Believing that they're always going to be doing good because of these national histories that we're taught and so forth. All right. School influence can diminish or compete with family influence depending upon the family. I mean, some families are so very tight that, what's going to dominate is what's being promoted in the family, no matter what. School influence declines rapidly, of course, after people complete school, right? There's no longer that influence. By gathering students into large groups, schools facilitate peer socialization. So the biggest exposure to peers usually occurs when you start going to school. All right. I mean, you may have neighborhood kids come over before you go to school, whatever. But the largest peer influence typically starts with school. So the next socializing agent are peers. Early in life, peer influence is limited, usually just to siblings, right? But once a child starts preschool or daycare, right, their peer influence increases. And, little kids, even 3, 4 years old, they pick up from other kids. So peer influence can become a powerful socializing force. For example, social reality, which is what everyone's saying and believing and passing, right? Whether or not it's baseless or totally factless, can dominate the perception of truth. What is true? What people see as true, And I put question marks there because too often social reality has no basis in truth, but it dominates because everyone's saying it, right? And the thing about social reality, it's so easy to control. All you have to do is create a wave, and everyone starts passing it, repeating it, reinforcing it, and then it dominates, right? No facts are required, which is, works perfectly because people don't want to be bothered with the facts. They don't retain the facts. They don't learn the facts. They don't seek the facts. Okay, now the power of peer groups they have over young people is based largely upon childhood vulnerability when you're at that young formative stage, right? You're at a point where kids are struggling to develop a self-identity, who they are, and exactly how they fit in with others, all right, which is very important to them. Two, they're at a stage where they're struggling to determine self-worth in comparison with their peers, all right? And that kind of leads to early social status. Who are the cool kids? Who are the losers? And this could be very, very important to kids. They want to be part of the in group. All right. Three, it's at a point where there's increased self-consciousness. You're becoming more self-aware, and you have concern over what others think of you. That's called the looking glass self. Right? We'll talk about that further down. But basically, it's the idea that a big part of how we see ourselves is based upon how we see others assessing us or evaluating us. If we see others as giving us approval, we may think highly of ourselves, right? If we see others as mocking or ridiculing or denigrating you, then you may have a bad self-opinion. Of course, that varies from person to person, that effect, but it in general it has a pretty big influence. 4, the overwhelming power of social reality. What everyone is saying, what gossip is being passed, right? Big effect. And last thing, school-sized groups, which is large numbers. All right. For example, high school. My high school was over 4,000 kids. It was big, and that can have a big impact, especially today when everyone pretty much has cell phones, and there's instantaneously spread of gossip, whatever, right? If something happens to some student, right, that's embarrassing, for example, that can be spread everywhere in a moment. Peer influence involves sharing new information, sharing attitudes and opinions, all right, whether they're valid or baseless. Repeating, reinforcing gossip, spreading rumors. Repeating reinforces things heard from other sources, all right? Just parroting social media or the news media or entertainment industry, movies and music or whatever. All right. Now, a person can belong to multiple peer groups, each having vastly different influences, agendas, values, beliefs, right? And having different impacts or effects, each group. All right. Now, another thing is that within these peer groups, there may be opinion leaders. As kids, is usually the most popular, dominant, or influential person, right? Example, opinion leaders define what is the in thing, what is cool, what is not cool. And I give an example of what I think is kind of a ridiculous extreme, right? But it happens very frequently with young girls. For example, let's say the most popular girl develops breasts late. While other girls who develop breasts early, they look down upon themselves, right? Because they're not, they're the weirdo. They're not like the popular girl. But if the popular girl develops breasts early, then if the other girl developed breasts early, that's a good indication. Same thing with menstruation. Same sort of thing. Now, opinion leaders, I put here, opinion leaders are going to come back in network theory when we talk about network theory. And often opinion leaders are targeted and utilized to spread things through a network. more efficient, effective way of spreading things through a network? Well, you target the opinion leader, and you influence that person. Peer influence can diminish family influence, especially in the high school years. So that happens quite a bit. Okay, last one is media. Includes news, media, TV programs, internet, movies, social media. All right. Now, early in life, very, very potent influences are little kid shows, whatever, like Barney, things like that, right? But it can also be news media, right? Even movies, TV shows, things a kid can pick up on as other siblings or the parents are watching it, right? So that can be influenced by that. I can give you an example that's maybe somewhat extreme. When 9/11 occurred, my older brother's youngest boy, my nephew, he was, I don't know, like maybe 3 years old. And he's sitting on the couch next to my brother as they're watching the news. And they're watching people jump out of buildings that are on fire because, they don't want to burn. It's more horrible and painful to die by being burnt up than by falling out a window. So as my brother's watching this, he's like just focused on it. He forgot that the younger boy's sitting right next to him. And then the younger boy says, "Hey, Daddy, why would people jump out of a big building?" Right? And then my brother realizes, he's sitting next to him, so he grabs the controller and turns off the TV right away. And boy, after that young boy was so fixated on 9/11 and the Taliban, he just couldn't get it out of his mind. So, it can happen. Even news media can influence kids early on. They can pass valid information, these sources, or their information can be highly manipulative, even propaganda. How? Well, I don't want to get into all this media stuff. There's a long analysis, but some of the very basic things is, news media, they get to pick and choose what stories to show and what not to show, what to cover, what not to cover. And they get to pick and choose what information to present, all right, and what not to present. It's so easy to spin. We talked about history. We talked about Hollywood history, I think in lesson one. Yeah, lesson one, we talked about sources where people pick up on history. One of the courses, schools and formal education, where you have to read these textbooks and listen to lectures, and then you have to try to cram and memorize information for a test, and then you all dump it and forget it right afterwards. Or you have the History Channel programs, or, it's another, if you bother to spend an hour watching some episode. News media is another source where you get like a little blurb that lasts probably no more than a minute or two. This day in history, this happened. They don't have too much time to dedicate it to it. Or another source is Hollywood history. Movies that purport to be historical, right? All right. Now we talked about history, how history is like a court trial, right? In a court trial, you cannot manufacture false evidence. That's against the law. You go to jail for that in a court trial. At the same time, you cannot conceal or withhold evidence. That's just as much of a crime. You go to jail for that, right? Both of which are perjury, lying, right? By manufacturing false evidence, you're creating a lie. By withholding key evidence, you're just as well creating a lie. Now, we said that in academic history, it's hard to manufacture false things, all right? Because you're gonna publish some book or text or document, right, that everyone can review, and do a fact check on. Go back and check your original documents, whatever, right? Now, of course, a lot of people don't do that, and a lot of people base their opinions on what everyone's saying about it, which happens way too often. Well, I know what it is because everyone's saying this. Well, usually that's baseless, but people always do that. For something that's going to be taught in a system-wide school, people can do a fact check, right? They can peer review it. All right. So it's hard to make stuff up. But it's so easy to leave facts out. And that's what's done quite a bit in history, right? To leave key facts out. It's hard to make up stuff in historical books, but it's easy to leave stuff out. And it's easy to twist and distort the appearance of things based upon what facts you choose, what you don't choose, and how you spin each of those facts. I gave an example of Pearl Harbor, how Gordon Pryng was like a clever lawyer, right? Using the method of fragment, compartmentalize facts, right? Leave key facts out, then isolate those facts so they don't lead to the conclusion, the proper conclusion, but lead them on a wild goose chase off somewhere else, right? And then end up saying, well, it really didn't mean anything. All right, now History Channel. Usually, those are that's I don't know how to say it. They're very entertainment orientated. They're not very probative. In depth. Of course, news media, little blurbs are really lack substance. Now. Then you have Hollywood history. Now, we said that academic history, you can't make stuff up. It's very hard to make stuff up, but it's easy to leave stuff out. Well, in Hollywood history, not only is it easy to leave stuff out, right? It is so easy to make up stuff. Hollywood history is so full of false, manufactured stuff, right? These are not written, a Hollywood script is not written by a historian. It's a script writer, right? He's just, their motive is to make something entertaining, right? They don't know the history. In most cases, they may read like a book or so, right? And kind of get a little bit, but they make up a whole bunch of other stuff. And at the same time, it could also be very manipulative. It could be propaganda. And there's so many examples, from American Sniper, to that movie Argo. My goodness, how many factually incorrect things there are in those movies. I gave you a video on American Sniper, if you recall. Okay. So then I say, well, they can also, like news media, can also spin, twist, distort things. They can also use salience methods. And usually, salience methods are often used by the government, for example, when they time certain things. But let's talk about salience methods. And the idea behind the importance of salience is not, people may know a lot of things, that, this or that, whatever, right? But very little is actually very salient in their mind. It can be way back in the resources or the memory somewhere, right? Hard to access it, right? So what influences the way you see things are the few things that are very high and active in your mind. That's salient. Salient means to stand out, all right? So what stands out? Well, things that stand out are things that are socially reinforced. Social reinforcement has a huge impact, and you can see that in Alcohol Anonymous, how it's very important to have social support groups. Family support, huge. Repetition, so things that are socially reinforced are also repeated, right? We don't retain a lot of facts, right? It's hard to retain facts because you have to grow neural connections, and they don't just appear. It's not like flipping a silicon chip, digital, bit. Recency, timing. The more recent it is, the more impactful it is. So that's the importance of timing. If you want to release a certain information, right, just before a certain event, let's say an election, well, you don't do that 6 months down the line. You don't do it a month down the line. You do it 5 to 10 days or less than that, right? 3 to 10 days. And usually they don't do it closer than 3 because they want people to mold over, chew it up at the water cooler, so to speak, right? So about 3 to 10 days, they'll release something right before the election to have a big impact. And we saw timing with the Gulf of Tonkin. the 30-day plan. It was all timed when you release information, when you make these threats, and so forth. Same thing with our invasion of Iraq, to get the resolution for that. That was all timed. If you recall those things, I'm not sure if you recall any of it. Probably not likely. Emotions. If you attach strong emotions, they tend to stick out, right? Fear, right? If you hype up the fear with something, it tends to be elevated, and it's prominent in your brain. If there's anger, right, or hate, or humor sticks. When complex facts all fade the instant you're exposed to them, you don't retain any of it, right? A funny joke will last, especially if it gets social reinforcement. Everyone's saying it, everyone's laughing. Ha ha ha. Jokes, which are baseless, have no substance, are far more powerful, have far greater impact upon perceptions than intelligent analysis, complex facts. That's all like, what? Gone. Mocking ridicule, that works great, because people kind of relish in that sort of thing. It kind of gives them a warm, fuzzy feeling, giggle, right? Ego, anything if you attach ego to it, boy, it stands out. Anything dealing with self-pride or self-serving, right? You tend to grab onto that if it serves your purpose. Right? We talked about how people tend to naturally bias and distort their perceptions. There could be 1,000 facts, right? 999 proven one view, right? One fact proving the other view, and if that view supports what benefits you, you're going to cling to that one fact. Forget all the rest, right? You'll find ways to reject those other facts, that are totally baseless. You'll just grab onto it. That's what people do. Simple things are retained, right? Far more than complex things. Got to keep it simple. All right, so those are some methods. If you can control those, if you can control salience, you can control how things are perceived. I give a couple of other examples here on news media. News media often does this. I've seen this done. They use a two-sided method. This is very similar to the Mark Antony method. The idea is you appear to fairly present one side when you really want to attack it, right? So you present some facts supporting one side, but then you shift it and say, yeah, but this, but this, right? And you cut the legs out of that one side. Now, the thing about the two-sided method is you could do it the exact opposite way. You could take the other view and do the exact same thing just as effectively. Now I'm not going to talk more about this. Maybe I'll talk about this one example here. So this example relates to my experience in the lead up to the invasion of Iraq war resolution. All right, which is voted on. I think it was October 10th, I believe. They voted upon that shortly before the November election. In the build-up to this, the press literally made me sick to my stomach. I'm watching all the major networks, ABC, NBC, CBS. I'm watching CNN, right? And I'm literally just sick. They should have been asking the hard questions, but they weren't, all right? They were just pumping up fear, right? Fear that Saddam had, and they assumed Saddam had weapons of mass destruction, and they pumped out the fear of those, what he could do with it, right? That's good for selling a news program, right? But it's not good for to influencing the public for support of national policy. So they should have been asking the hard questions, the true questions like, does Iraq really have WMD? No, they just assumed they did, right? Was Saddam suicidal enough to use WMD on the U.S., right? To use WMD on the U.S. is suicide. That's going to bring down holy hell upon your country and yourself, right? Was Saddam suicidal, or was he a coward, cowering in a hole somewhere, hiding out, trying to survive when they found him? Why would Saddam? They didn't ask why would Saddam be so stupid as to give WMD to radical fundamentalists, jihadists, right, who would turn around and use it on him first. Why? Because their number one priority was not attacking the U.S. Their number one priority was setting up a caliphate, their own religious state, right? And how do they do that? They got to take down a Middle East country. They got to take down an Iraq or a Syria, right? Which ISIS largely did at one point. Now, during the psychological buildup to prepare the public to accept the planned Iraq war, invasion war, the media fully promoted the government-manufactured perception that Iraq had WMD and they were going to use it against us in some way, either use it against them themselves or give it to terrorists, right? They hyped up the fear, right? And it worked. The American public's like, oh yeah, we got to go invade Iraq. And, okay. All right, so now I want to talk about 4 types of socialization. First is gender socialization. Next is socialization of race, then of ethnicity, and then of nationality. Now, gender socialization is basically the process by which males and females are taught the appropriate behaviors, attitudes, traits, for their biological sex. Gender socialization can differ greatly from culture to culture. Some examples are Western nations versus fundamentalist Islam in terms of education. In the West, it is believed that it is very important to educate women. Right? Women are a very important, vital resource, national asset for productivity to benefit our economy, right? Use it. Use women, right? Give them opportunity. Let them be productive, right? It's going to benefit our economy. So you got to educate them to give them the skills to be productive. The biggest factor in productivity of a workforce is education. And technology is another thing. The tools you have. In Islam, fundamentalist Islam, they cease female education in like 5th or 6th grade. India, there's an example I give of how they treat women, especially brides. There's something called bride burning, where if the husband doesn't get enough dowry, they use as extortion, the threat of burning the bride, right? Some crazy stuff. All right, so I say here half of all military strategy is, recall that, is the effective utilization of your resources, both human and material, right? A lot of people think strategy is like this complex move or this fancy move. Well, a lot of it just deals with knowing how to control your resources, how to utilize your resources, how to sever the resources for the enemy. As an example, I want to give you how gender socialization can be a huge impact upon attitudes and these patterns of behaviors and traits. I'll give an example of my niece, my older brother's middle child. He has a boy, girl, then a boy. Right, the middle child is a girl named Mary, and because she was younger than the older one who was a boy, the boy always got for presents sporting goods, because we wanted to really instill that within him, kind of like propagandize that within him, get him all interested in sports, and so he gets athletic, and sure enough, he became a very good athlete, a really exceptional athlete. And so all the gifts that he got were like baseballs and baseball bats and hockey sticks and basketballs, footballs, and whatnot, right? So the girl naturally, grew up to believe that all gifts and toys were sporting goods, right? So I kind of saw this in her, and on the Christmas when she was 3 years old, I thought, Mary never got a doll, right? I'll get her first doll. So I went to the Toys R Us and I picked out a Barbie doll, right? Those skinny, long dolls, and I wrapped it up with gift wrap and I was so excited, to wait for her to open it. I thought she'd be so excited to see this. I couldn't wait, you know. So the way that we would work the Christmas would be on the evening before Christmas. They get to open their presents, and each kid gets open one at a time. They take turns. They can't all just ripping them open, right? And they get to see what each one got. So each one takes a turn opening a present. When it came to Mary's turn, she reaches for the long box. The Barbie doll's this long box, and I knew it was a Barbie doll from the box shape, and I was so excited. I couldn't wait to see her expression. I thought she'd be like, oh my God, a doll, right? And so she's like, it's so funny watching these kids open presents because they're viciously tearing the paper away in all excitement, right? And paper's literally flying like the World War II ended. There's confetti coming down in Times Square, and paper's just flying, right? And she gets it out and she sees it, right? She opens a box, she sees it, right? She grabs it and she throws it over her shoulder, like, what the hell is this? I don't want this, right? And I was like, oh my God. So she was socialized to believe that, what's this Barbie doll? Who wants this, right? She wanted the baseball or football or something like that. All right, so I want to give an example from myself, how the power of gender socialization. And I don't know how I came to believe this, but when I was in 5th grade, I had this English teacher named Mrs. Olson. She was a little Japanese woman. She was friends with my mom. She was close personal friends, right? And I was just a screwball in her class. I didn't care, and I didn't pay attention. I didn't do anything right. And then one day she came up to me and talked, kind of took me aside and says, "Hey, Jim, why don't you try my class? And I said, come on, Mrs. Olson. English is for girls, right? Science is for guys, right? I don't need this stuff, right? And I believed it back then. Of course, little do I know that English is the most important class you probably take growing up, because language is the basis of thought, all right? Language is the tools of thought. Language is words, and words are concepts, and those concepts are the tools we use to analyze and understand things, right? So I fully had no appreciation of the importance of English, and I was totally misguided by what I was exposed to, what I came to believe, and later on I wrote a novel, believe it or not. I totally neglected English, but ended up writing a novel. Socialization of race, ethnicity, and nationality. Right? Okay, so what they are is, is defined as the developmental process by which children acquire certain behaviors, similar to this, perceptions, values, and attitudes towards their ethnic group or racial group or, their nation that they live in, right? And come to see themselves and other people within their group as part of the in-group, all right? So it's racial, ethnic, national in-group formation or socialization, and which includes, 1, teaching children about their racial, ethnic, or national heritage in a positive light, right? To build up pride and, to stroke their egos. So this is often referred to as pride development, right? Your group is good. Your group is the best, right? I just want to add here that a famous theologian, I don't want to get too preachy, but a famous theologian named Oswald Chambers said that pride is a deification of self, right? To deify means to make yourself a god. So in a sense, he's saying you're making yourself a god through pride, right? You're worshiping yourself, in a sense. It's self-worship, right? And the first commandment says, do not put any other gods before me. Well, we do that with pride. We also do that whenever we sin, but that's besides the point here. All right, so now, second involves preparing children to see things in terms of a biased in-group versus out-group differentiation or discrimination, where the in-group is seen as being good and better. The out-group is seen as being bad and worse. And oftentimes this involves dehumanizing the out-group, right? They're a bunch of just filthy animals or whatever, right? It also involves a promotion of mistrust of the out-group, which refers to socializing children to be wary of people from other races, ethnicities, and nationalities, the out-group, right? It's often irrational and leads to conflict, right? Some extreme examples I include here. One thing that can come from this is xenophobia, which is an irrational fear, loathing, and hatred of foreigners. Not even knowing them, but you just have this pre-established fear and hatred. Another thing that can happen is dehumanizing, and the impact of dehumanizing is if you can dehumanize another person, it's easier to do evil things to that person, even to harm them physically. That's often done with propaganda during war. You want to make them into like a vicious animal. The opposite of the above is egalitarianism, which refers to socializing children with the belief that all people are equal and should be treated with a common humanity. All right, so now the next thing I want to discuss is the socialization and development of the sense of self. And this is a very core concept because the self is critical. And we talked way back in lesson number 1. Let me try to pull it up here. Lesson number 1 that we talked about social forces. These are all social forces, and the target right here is your perceptions. Well, this is also your it's called your cognitive reality. Your perceptions is the only reality you know because that's where knowing is, right? That's all the reality you know. People say, "Oh, I know reality." Well, you know your perceptions of reality. That's it. Whether that's true or not, what quality it is, what factual basis it has, that's all up and for grabs. All right, and yourself has a big influence upon this. So, what is a self? All right, the self is your free will. It's your soul. It's a core of who you are. Right. In Christianity, it's also your fleshly nature. Right, and in Christianity, it's the core of the Christian problem, right? Because it results in our fleshly nature. It results in our desire to serve ourselves, to put ourselves first, all right? And in Christianity, this is how how God made people, right? This is the way we're made. We're made with free will. We're made as independent beings, and that fundamental nature as an independent being is to please ourselves. To benefit ourselves, to serve ourselves, right? To promote ourselves. Right? Now, there's a book that I started reading, and I put it down after a while because I realized it's very weak analysis. But it's a book written by a guy named Richard Dawkins, and it's called The Selfish Gene. And he says that, well, the reason why people are selfish is people are selfish by nature. And he says that's because it promotes survival. Right? Natural selection. It's the people who are self-serving who survive. And that's why we're bred through through the thousands of years to be self-serving. Right? And that's human nature. All right, so why is that important? Well, why is it important to study the self? Because the self is a driving force behind everything we do. All our thoughts, our desires, our actions. The self drives what we want, what we strive for, what we want to do, what we want to think and believe, right? Recall from lesson number 1 that there are 2 factors, general factors, that form our perceptions and beliefs. One is cognitive factors, and the second is motivational factors. Now, when you say cognitive, that deals with the quality and extent of information, right? Do people generally have, extensive quality information? No. They usually operate on little to nothing. And the other is analytical ability, the quality and extent of their analytical ability, which also is very lacking. Now, the other part is motivations. So a big factor in how we perceive things are our motivations. They determine how we see things. And it's driven by self. Remember we talked about self-serving bias, how extremely bizarre and unbelievably twisted you could see things based upon your desire to believe it a certain way. And then it's all reality. It's all truth in your mind. All right. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is the stages of self development. All right. I want to give you Mead's framework here, and he has 3 stages, right? The first stage is the I, then the me, then the generalized other. The I occurs at between ages 0 when you're first born to age 5, roughly. And the me stage is between 5 and 9, and then generalized other develops after about 9 years old. All right. So let's take a look at what he's saying here. So at the I stage, it's totally egocentric. You're totally self-centered. At this stage, all you really know is yourself, right? All you know is what's kind of in your head. Your entire world is you. You're largely incapable of getting inside other people's heads, except for basic emotions. You may kind of, at that stage, you may kind of figure out that your parents are mad at you, or they're happy, right? Whatever. But you're not really getting into complex understanding of what they're thinking, right? Because you don't have that capability yet. So you have little understanding of others outside yourself. Thus, you have little empathy for others, right? There's also little looking glass self, which is you seeing and perceiving and forming an idea of how they see you, all right? So you don't have much of that. Now, the advantage of that is, right, you're largely free of self-consciousness. So as you're a kid, you're kind of just free and, free spirit, right? And self-consciousness, I believe, is bad because it can be so enchaining. It can be so tormenting. It can be so inhibiting, right? It can cripple some people. Now, the second stage is the me stage. It develops between 5 and 9. And the me is not limited to the I world only. Now a child has developing a social self, because they can kind of see how others see them, right? They can read other people, get into their heads, how they evaluate us, right? Although often with error, right? We may make some mistakes in the reactions and behavior and things of people, right? I know I do several times a year when things are passed. I read it wrong. Sociologists can call this the looking glass self, right, which is the notion that our self-image is made largely of our perceptions of how others see us, how we perceive others seeing us. And at this point, self-consciousness begins to develop more, right, which we said can be tormenting, inhibiting, and chaining. You become, you may be withdrawn even. All right, so let's take a look at what the looking glass self is. Another term for the looking glass self is a mirrored self-image. Right? It's the idea that the image we hold of ourselves is largely an assessment of how others evaluate us. So a big part of how we see ourselves is determined by how we see others evaluating us. All right? We tend to see ourselves as we believe others see us. If we perceive others as ridiculing, mocking us, looking down upon us, denigrating us, all right, this may give us a low self-opinion. If we perceive others as praising us, holding us up in a high light, right, we tend to have a high self-opinion. Right? Now, this can vary from person to person. Some people don't give a damn what other people think, but most people are highly attuned, in general, to what others are saying about them. Right? I can give you an example of my older brother's 2 boys, the oldest and the youngest. All right, there's 3. Samuel's the oldest, and Paulie is the youngest. Now Samuel, from 3 years old, was a phenomenal athlete. He was making diving catches at 3 years old. Every Nerf ball I threw to him, I threw away from him, so he had to run and dive for it. And he would make every single catch as a 3-year-old. He'd run and dive, and he became a phenomenal athlete. A football star, baseball star, played college baseball, and did very well in college baseball. However, he always thought himself not that good. Like, I'm not that good, right? He looked down upon himself all the time. Whereas Paulie was a good athlete too, but he didn't have the coordination, the phenomenal coordination of Samuel. Paulie's strength was actually just strength. He was a super strong kid. He got third in nationals in powerlifting, but he didn't have that really fine coordination. He was a good athlete, but not like top like Samuel. But Paulie thought himself as the best. He was very cocky and confident, right? Too cocky, putting on other people and trying to intimidate other people. And so he was the opposite case. He thought way way high of himself. All right. Anyways, so social identity. We'll talk about the generalized other state now. So the generalized other stage occurs after 9. After about 9, at this stage, a person has learned social norms and values, which influence perceptions and actions, right? And also determine conformity requirements, what you have to do to conform to be part of a group, to be included within a group, right? In different groups and at different levels, macro and micro, right? So, the groups, one is a family, right? Another group can be friends. Another group can be some club you belong to. Another group can be the wider community. Another group could be the nation, right? So that's different sizes, right? Each of those have different requirements for conformity, how you have to conform to those groups in order to be included, accepted. One could be your job, right? A lot of people told the company policy, company line, right? So they to not make waves. And cultural influence and so increases, and also social identity forms. So what is social identity? Social identity is basically your group identity, the sense of who you are based upon what groups you belong to, right? There's some general types of groups. One is gender, right? Now there's race, ethnicity, nation, right? These are all just general groups, right? Some specific groups, I give an example, like through the formative high school years. In high school, there could be all sorts of different groups, more than this, I'm sure. There's the popular mean girls, there's the jocks, there's a whole bunch of just regular people. There's all the geeky nerds, right? The real smart people, and often in the chess club, whatever, right? There's the dopers and goths. The different groups, people form groups, and they join them. So I want to show you a video that kind of discusses some of these groups. It's somewhat of a funny video.
I don't trust this kid any further than I can throw him.
Well, with your bad knee, Ed, you shouldn't throw anybody. It's true.
What is so dangerous about a character like Ferris Bueller is he gives good kids bad ideas.
Uh-huh.
Last thing I need at this point in my career is 1,500 Ferris Bueller disciples running around these halls. He jeopardizes my ability to effectively govern this student body.
Well, makes you look like an ass is what he does, Ed.
Thank you, Grace. I think you're wrong.
Oh, well, he's very popular, Ed. The sportos, the motorheads, geeks, sluts, bloods, wastoids, dweebies, dickheads, they all adore him. They think he's a righteous dude.
That is why I have got to catch him this time. To show these kids that the example he sets is a first class.
All right, so that's some examples of the groups in high school. So why do people feel need to join groups, right? Even loners join groups, even like the outcasts kind of join groups, a group of outcasts, so to speak, right? Well, there's driving needs. One is self-esteem. You join a group because you want to feel good about yourself. You want to boost your conception of yourself. You want to boost your image of yourself before other people, right? So you join groups. So it's like people want to be part of like the in crowd, and people name drop, whatever, right? A sense of belonging, right? Some people join groups because they feel a need to belong to something, right? People join groups because there's safety in numbers, especially in a big school, big high school, for example. They feel like they need to be part of some crowd, not to be standing on the island by themselves. Okay, so now that's kind of developing the sense of identity, sense of self. I want to talk about theories of social interaction. We're going to talk about Erving Goffman's Dramaturgical Theory today. Tomorrow we'll get into Peter Blau's exchange theory. This takes about 2 lessons. Then each of these take about 1 lesson each. Social influence experiments, we covered these already. The Ash experiment, the Milgram experiment, how social influence can be a big influence upon the way we perceive things. Network theory, and then social reality in a dominant mass perception, right? Now, in the last 3, I teach many methods that are used all the time today to manipulate people. But really, from my experience, the masses never learn these. They never really understand and retain them. So these things keep working forever. Although they'll say, no, I'm never fooled, I'm never manipulated. They just like over their heads. All right, so we're going to talk about Goffman's dramaturgical theory first. All right. Now, if you look at the word dramaturgical theory, the key thing is drama. That's what stands out, which deals with acting. So Shakespeare wrote, and Goffman, I believe, I kind of remember he used this line in his book. It's like the first line in his book. All the world is a stage, and all men and women are mere players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts, right? So what he's saying is, what Goffman is saying by this, he says, we're all actors performing roles, or we're posers, right, putting on appearances, okay? So according to Goffman, he says, we live our lives like actors on a stage, performing different socially defined roles, like parts, right? Like parts in a play. These roles are the different hats we wear. Here are some examples. Your job, what you do for your profession, is a role you play, right? You may act totally different at work than you do at home. You're a spouse, that's another role you play. A parent, maybe. A friend, a citizen, the life of the party, right? The guy who tells jokes at parties, or a church attendee, an organization member, a member of a subculture, all right, whatever that is, whatever subculture it is. So we play different roles in different settings. We put on different hats, put on different appearances in different settings, based upon the setting. Sometimes we can combine the roles, right? You can perform multiple roles, right? You have a job, right? Then you're a spouse also, and then you got to take care of the kids, right? And you got to come home like a woman. She's got a job, right? She comes home. She also cleans the house and does the dishes and mops the floor and all that stuff, right? Does the laundry. Husband watches TV. So a fundamental insight of Goffman's is that we all have a self, an ego, which is what we talked about here, right? So this is the driving force according to Goffman. This is the underlines. This is the motor, right? We all have a self, an ego that is highly attuned to what others think and are saying about us, and thus we are concerned about how we appear before others, our mirrored self-image. We seek approval and respect on the one hand, and strive to avoid embarrassment, humiliation, mocking, ridicule on the other. Now, is that true? Well, of course that's true. That's the core of nature, people. Who wants to be like ridiculed and mocked? People want to ridicule and mock, but they don't want themselves to be ridiculed and mocked. Who wants to look like a fool? To protect our image, we put on a play. We try to control our appearances. Right? People say, oh, no, I'm true to myself. No, people are always putting on appearances. They do it automatically, right, without even knowing, just like how people lie all the time without even knowing. We try to project the image we want others to see. Goffman called this impression management. So do people put on appearances? I mean, when you go to work, you go in like cut off blue jeans, or well, depending upon your job, right? Let's say you're a corporate executive. You don't walk around in your boxer shorts and tank top T-shirt. What are some examples? Do we do it all the time? We're always putting on appearances. We're always controlling our appearances. When we go out in public, we make sure we're dressed properly. And you behave properly for the situation, and any situation can change, right? And we behave differently in different situations. But when we do it, are we always aware of it? No, we do it almost naturally, instinctively. People try to control the appearances of things, right? Now, could that simply be just putting your best foot forward? Yeah, right, which is no big deal. It's somewhat innocent. Or could controlling appearances be a form of lying? actually, controlling the way something appears is a fundamental method of lying. Right? Now, this is understood better by the ancient, Greeks, for example, or in Christianity, the Israelites back in the time, right? So in Greek, biblical Greek, the word for true is aletheia. And what that means is it doesn't mean anything that is not true. It means something is true when the unveiled reality behind a thing conforms with its surface appearance. So when they come together and they're the same, then it's true. So that their concept of truth is based upon whether the appearance is real or not. Appearances are key to truth and lies, and this is again important to the Bible, right? Truth versus lies, which is related to good versus evil. In fact, to the fundamental nature of God versus the fundamental nature of the devil. Right? God is ultimate truth. The devil is the ultimate liar. In fact, his name means to lie. Right? It comes from the Greek word diaboline, which means to throw across, to throw off, right? Which is the fundamental nature of lies. It's where you get the word diabolical. It's where you get the word devious from. Deception. All right. Now, another concept of Goffman is audience segregation, right? And it's the idea that when we stand before different audiences, we put on different appearances. We play different roles before the specific audience, all right? So examples here, when you're at work, you perform a different role. When you're a spouse, you may perform a different role. Let's say in the bedroom, right? Then when you are, as a parent in front of your kids. Another example is, let's say, a gay guy in the military. He acts one way before his fellow soldiers, but when he goes to a gay club, let's say, he acts entirely different. Or, maybe this is kind of an extreme case, but let's take this guy, right? Let's say his daytime job, he's an accountant, right? Just kind of like a nerdy number cruncher, right? But on Saturday nights, he's a lead guitarist in a punk rock band, right? Then on Sundays, he teaches a Bible class to some sixth graders, right? So people put on different roles in front of different audiences. And then Goffman talks about a concept of front stage versus backstage. The idea is when we're in front of important audience, right, a socially significant audience, that's the front stage, and we're on our toes, doing our best to control appearances and to look good, all right? When we're home, that's backstage, behind closed doors. We may act entirely differently. People guys can scratch themselves in private places and fart and walk around in their boxer shorts at home. Let down their hair, so to speak. But there's more to it. There's more to the front stage and backstage. And Goffman, I read his book. He talks about it. He talks about how people get together backstage and they collude with one another, and you can have coaching, right? You can have networking to help control the appearances of a scene, right? Now, this could be something that's typical, like political campaigns, right? Always talk about how to present the candidate in the best possible light and what to avoid, what information to avoid, and how to spin this or that, right? Which is typical campaigns, political campaign stuff. But it can also be used to manufacture false appearances, to create a lie, right? And we can talk about this. I'll give you some examples of this when we get to network theory. How the CIA, for example, coach people, right, to control appearances before the wider public, who may be exposed to, cameras, whatever, right? And they want to use a person to manufacture some false thing. May not make sense now, but I'll explain examples how this works. So kind of keep that in mind. Now, another thing Goffman talked about is it's more than just what we say and do. It's also facial expressions and gestures. Well, gestures are what we do, right? They signify meaning as well. All right, so facial expressions. Now, in general, facial expressions are instinctive and universal. All right, they're instinctive because we don't have to learn to do them. They're just natural. All right, and tests have proven this across cultures. For example, smile means happiness, no matter what culture. It doesn't matter if you're in some remote, Aboriginal isolated community in Australia, or you're in New York City, whatever. Big. Smile means happiness across cultures, some sort of gladness. A frown means sadness. Facial expressions of anger or frustration or surprise are all universally accepted. All right, are all universally recognized. So I want to give an example here. Here's some facial expressions. All right, there's happiness, joy. This is surprise. This is sadness. Here's anger. Here's fear. Down here is disgust. Like here's contempt for something. Right. This is confusion. This is boredom. All right. Okay. All right. Now, gestures are not instinctive, but they're rather learned, and they're not universal. They're specific to different cultures. All right. They are defined by culture. Example I can give is two guys kissing in Russia. Right. For example, this is a standard greeting, right? But two guys kissing in the U.S. is entirely different. That signifies some sort of homosexual attraction there. In the U.S. That's somewhat shocking. For example, I can give the case when I first saw two guys kiss. I was totally shocked. I'd never seen two guys kissing before, and these guys were really just sucking face hard. It shocked me. Now, another example of a gesture, I'm trying to find a funny example here, is a headbutt, right? Now, this guy here, Dennis Rodman, was a basketball player for the Chicago Bulls, and just kind of to reintroduce the concept of bias, self-serving bias. When Dennis Rodman played for other teams, like he played for Detroit Pistons, and I believe he played for San Antonio, some Texas team anyway, and when he played for other teams, Bulls fans hated his guts. They just, they wanted to strangle the guy. They just hated him, right? When he came to the Bulls, right, they loved him, right? He's just as dirty, if not more dirty, when he's playing for the Bulls. It's funny how people bias things. All right, now Dennis Rodman, he headbutted the referee. All right, now that wasn't a lovey tap, that's for sure, but with my nephew Joshua, it was. Right, so same gesture, but two different meanings. Now, with my nephew Joshua, when he's about 2 years old, at that age, kids are so adorable. They're so cute and adorable, and you want to show affection to the kid. But I was a little bit like homophobic, and I didn't want to kiss the kid because he's a boy, right? It kind of made me feel weird. So I taught him to do a headbutt as a gesture of affection. So we would headbutt each other. Hey, Joshua, boom, right? And we headbutt, and boy, he'd hit hard sometimes, right? Anyways, so I taught him this, right? This became our pattern behavior, and then when he's about 2 years old, it was the first time he went to Detroit to visit the in-laws, my sister-in-law's parents, and their family and friends and so forth. And Josh was headbutting everyone, and they're like, "Oh man, what's this kid doing? That's why is he behaving this way?" They thought there's something wrong with him. And my brother said, "That's my brother Jim." Right. So when my brother came back and told me about this, right, he's like complaining about me, Josh was headbutting everyone, and I was like, "Oh yeah, I'm sorry, didn't mean that to happen," right? But inside I was saying, "Yeah, that's my boy." Anyways, then Joshua went on, and he was headbutting all the kids in the neighborhood, and they'd be going home crying and so forth, right? All right, now another gesture is whistles, right? That's often a gesture, and in some cases it's done to say, "Hey, sexy," some pretty girl goes by, and then you got some whatever, construction worker or whatever, at a job site, and they whistle at some pretty girl walking by, right? But another use of another meaning for whistles it's a means of throwing an insult, mocking, like, "Oh, you're crazy," or "You're stupid, you don't know anything," right? And people like to throw those insults, and even though when they're the ones who know nothing, but they're set in their beliefs, they know reality in their heads. So they throw insults. People do that. So two different things. The same gesture can mean different things, and I give examples of how different gestures can mean different things. Okay, so here I have the Angry Traveler's Guide to Obscene Gestures, and we all kind of know what this means in the United States, right? Well, it's not the same thing in other countries. That is this in Britain and in Australia, right? So when Winston Churchill was doing this, right? He's a V for victory. Oh no, he was saying whatever to Adolf Hitler and the Nazis, whatever. This is what it is in Turkey, Brazil. Boy, that's complex. It looks like a lot of effort to say that. Here it is in Thailand. Why? In the U.S. this means, oh, hey, good job, right? Here in the U.S. this means okay, but over there, in France somehow this means, this. You see, it's all different here. This is an excited, I guess. So when Buckwheat was saying, doing this is what he really meant. He was really signing in French. And when our esteemed President Bush was flipping off the whole whatever. He wasn't really saying, in America, F you, whatever, right? He was speaking in Swahili because in Swahili, this means I love you. So he's saying, hey, I love you in Swahili. Okay. Now, there's nuances in facial expressions and gestures, all right? So a nuance is genuine facial expressions tend to evaporate in 4 to 5 seconds. Right, so when you make an expression like this, they don't last long, just 4 or 5 seconds, and they're gone. Right. Example is a smile that lasts longer than 4 or 5 seconds indicates deceit, a phony smile. Right. There's other indications of a phony smile. For example, genuine smiles, you have a sparkle in your eyes. Right. Your eyebrows tend to dip down lower right there. Right. They're pulled down. The corners of your eyes, they have crow's feet, the wrinkles there, and the cheeks tend to lift in a genuine, real smile. Now, there's indications of a fake smile. Fake smile, the lips are straight, tend to be straight. They look forced. They show bottom teeth, right? So that means the lower lip is pulling down when it normally doesn't in a real smile. The eyes are forced open, kind of in a stilted way. All right, so those are some nuances. An exaggerated expression of surprise that lasts longer could indicate sarcasm or disbelief. For example, when people say, really? Right? They're not really indicating they're surprised or shocked. They're really saying, oh, you're full of crap. Right? That's one of the ways people do stuff. Eye contact that lasts too long is creepy. Example I give for this is my nephew Samuel. He's the oldest boy. He's a doctor now, by the way. And when he was young, about this age, he was so damn cute, man. I just love that kid so much. And I would take him, on Sundays, my brother would drop him off for me to babysit him when they go to church, and it was a good opportunity for me to spend time with him, and I would take him here and there. I used to love to take him to the airport, and he'd watch the airplanes. He'd cover his ears, right? Airplanes would come in, land, and he just loved airplanes. And then I'd take him to like a McDonald's to get something to eat, and I remember this one McDonald's. It was one actually near the airport. I took him to, and I for some reason I'm just adoringly staring at him. I just love the kid so much. I can just eat the kid up, and I was staring too long. I guess it made him feel kind of creepy, right? So he kind of turned away to the side and he pointed to the ceiling, right, to draw attention with it. Hey, look up there. And I thought it was so funny, that he's trying to get me to look away and get me to look up there, like I'm gonna fall for that. Yeah, well, what's up there, But yeah, I thought it was funny. Anyways, so a stare that lasts too long can be creepy, right? Too little eye contact can appear to be shifty or deceitful, some dishonesty. Of course, it could really be just nervousness or maybe some insecurity, right? Or maybe it can also mean like inattention, like bored, A weak handshake can mean lack of confidence or lack of backbone, all right? And people oftentimes read too much into that. I'll give you an example. I always like pointing this example. Here's Coach Dick. When he got let go by the Bears, right? He got a job with New Orleans Saints, and when he took the job, he said, "I'll only take it under the condition that you make me GM as well." So he's coaching GM. So he's getting to make decisions on picking draft picks and personnel. And during the first draft, when he's a coach, he had an opportunity to take this guy, Edgar and James, who turned out to be a great running back, right? He didn't pick him, right, because his handshake was weak. He said, he's a weak handshake, lack of character, or whatever. Right? He turns out to be a great running back, right? Instead, he took this guy, Ricky Williams, who totally bombed in the NFL, right? Didn't pan out at all. And to get this guy, he traded away 2 first-round draft picks, right? A third-round draft pick, 2 third-round draft picks, a 4th, 5th, a 6th, and 7th. He traded away the team, right, to get this guy, and this guy turned out to be a bomb, all because he didn't like this guy's handshake, which was quite a fiasco. All right, so we'll talk about other subtle things. The impact of technology. Well, the impact of technology, you can communicate from distances without any direct physical presence, without even seeing each other. Email, phone, text, whatever, right? You can use Skype, but you lose something in that as well. You don't get the full picture with Skype. So you lose the added meaning of facial expressions, body language, gestures, right? And that's why sometimes people feel a need to meet with people in person, right? To get a better read for the person, to be more sure about the person. They may want to get a better read on the person, or be able to better influence, persuade the person. So if you're in direct contact with a person, people think they can better persuade or influence them. And sociologists call this the compulsion of proximity. So the proximity is closeness, and the idea is, let's say this is a corporate meeting here between 2 companies. You have an American company, you have an Asian company, it looks like Japan, and they want to make a business deal. And these guys, to ensure that they get the deal done, they want to meet in person, maybe to better influence them, maybe to ensure there's a better understanding, right? So they fly all the way from United States to Japan to conduct a deal, right, in person. Because you have greater proximity and you have greater compulsion, which is to compel or persuade. All right, some additional concepts that Goffman covered, and these are all like, okay, one is called civil inattention. It's the idea that, when you have interaction with a stranger, you don't want to go into details, right, but you want to at least acknowledge that person, be polite. So the idea is to be polite, but have limited interaction with a stranger. Let's say you're walking down on a sidewalk, a narrow sidewalk, and you come up to a person, right? Now, if you totally disregard the other person, do not acknowledge or recognize that person and walk past, well, that's actually an interaction, and it's not a very pleasant interaction. It's like you can say, it's very cold and distant, right? So typically what people may do is just say, hey, good evening, whatever, right? Just a minor greeting. It's not too intrusive. It's not too involved. It's just, it's called civil. It's being civil, but it's inattentive. It's not, getting too involved or too much, giving too much attention to the situation. All right, and this differs from culture to culture, location to location. I can give you an example of Chicago where, civil. There's nothing civil about people just ignore other people in Chicago. There's so many people in Chicago that you get numb to other people, and you just walk down the street and no one acknowledges anyone. All right, that's all I'm going to say on that. Personal space. Okay, that's another thing Goffman talked about. Personal space in direct communication. It's along the lines of not being too intrusive, right? You want to maintain some appropriate distance. Now, this distance differs from culture to culture. Like, for example, Arab cultures, they tend to be closer in face-to-face proximity when you're communicating. It also differs in situation. Let's say it's an intimate situation between a couple, all right? Maybe a man and woman, for example, they may be closer face to face, and that's perfectly normal, right? There could be a normal situation or a formal situation, like during a job interview, or like a public situation where you're further away from people. Maybe people are way out in an audience. Here's an example I want to give you of personal distance here.
Joe. Yeah? Come on up. Elaine, you don't have a problem with her, do you?
We adore Elaine.
She wants to say hi. She's with her new boyfriend.
What's he like?
He's nice, bit of a close talker.
A what?
You'll see. Boy, I really had no idea that you felt this way about the Costanzas.
They're exhausting. It's like being in an asylum.
This is Erin.
Hello, Aaron.
Hello, Aaron.
So how long are you folks in town?
3 more days, and then we're off to Paris.
We're going with the Select Charter Group.
I love France. I was just there last year. In fact, you know, I still have an envelope full of French francs. I'll give them to you.
Well, we can't take money.
Oh, no, it's a gift from us.
Oh, that is so nice, Erin. Isn't he nice? So listen, has Jerry been showing you a good time?
No, I haven't.
You know, I have a friend who works at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. How'd you like a behind-the-scenes tour?
Really? You could do that?
Easily.
It wouldn't be any trouble?
Of course not.
When could we go?
How about right now?
I'm ready.
Are you sure?
Yes.
Okay, let me get my coat.
Elaine, what do you say?
Well, I don't think so, Erin. I have plans.
Oh. How about you, Jerry?
I'm sorry.
Okay. All right, so that's the idea of personal space there. All right. I want to give you another example. And again, this is an example of how it can differ from culture to culture. These are toilets in Japan, and I've been to Japan, and I've seen these. I've seen the old primitive ones, which are really just a slab in like a concrete slab, right? And people squat over these and they poop into these slots here. And for me, this is a little bit lack of personal space, especially with no barriers between. But in Japan, this is perfectly normal. So it differs, personal space. I'd have to I almost have to have my own room to myself here. I can't imagine doing this, pooping next to a person who's squatting right next to me. Talking about the ball game or the weather or something like that. So that shows how cultures differ. Yeah, let's see here. So here's kind of a summary of Goffman. Goffman sees human interactions as an act in which we use language and actions, including gestures and facial expressions, to create an impression, to put on an appearance. We put on our best appearance, depending upon the situation. At home, backstage, we may not care. We do this because we're driven to promote ourself, our ego. We're highly attuned to what other people are saying of us, and what especially like a larger crowd of people, right? And he gets into a lot of nuances of intimate relationships and details, whatever, right? And personally, I feel a lot of this is somewhat superficial, all right? And I also believe it's kind of a limited view. There's far more to interactions, and we're going to talk about some of that when we get to exchange theory. So this first lesson, I think, was pretty standard basic stuff on socializations, how we're socialized, how we're taught things, and we learn culture, and how it's reproduced generation from generation, and that the main socializing agents are family, school, peers, and media. All right. There's different types of socializations. You can break it down into specific things, right? We talked about the core, the importance of the development of self, right? How the self is important because it's the engine that drives us, it motivates us, it inspires us, it gets us to do what we want to do and think what we want to think and whatever, right? And how and how we behave and behave with other this changes as we develop. So we introduced a concept called the looking glass self, how our self-image is shaped in part by how we see others accepting or rejecting us, right? And how we perceive they view us, right? And we talked about one form of social interaction theory, Goffman's Dramaturgical Theory. All right, so that's it for that lesson.